Hi, it's Janine Turner, and welcome to Front Porch Philosophy, Day 10. Let's go retro, shall we? Let's take a deep breath, a collective deep breath, and just turn off all those depressing TV shows and those depressing Fox News alerts and all these things that ring in our head that drive us crazy, and let's just start having conversations again. National conversations with one another, and national conversations, which begin, I guess, in our own backyard, our own front porch, in our own neighborhood. That's what our founders believed. In our local community, this is where it begins, with one another, learning how to have a conversation. So we've been having a really kind of a cool conversation this week, haven't we? And I'm going to wrap this week with how we can have a national conversation with one another, which starts individually with you and me having conversations with one another on our front porch with people that may or may not agree with us. And we go back to Socrates. And this is, by the way, the book From Socrates to Sartre by Samuel Stumpf. And he talks about Socrates and his dialectic method. You know, a lot of kids learn by the Socratic method. It was one of history's most effective awakeners of men from their sleep of ignorance. So it's learning to have a discussion. Only if we can have a discussion can we truly become educated. Otherwise, we go back to where we started earlier in the week. We're just harboring opinions, and opinions are based on these imaginings that we see on the cave walls, according to Plato, and they're just opinions, and opinions don't really. We know maybe what we think is just, but we can't tell you why it's just. And so we must have conversations with one another and expand our knowledge in order to really awaken what the truth. And knowledge is virtue. That's what Plato believed. Knowledge is virtue. And John Adams, one of my favorite quotes of John Adams was that liberty cannot be preserved without a general knowledge among the people. And it's not just knowledge, but it's this type of knowledge. You know, knowledge of what's important in life. And so I think we have forgotten how to have a conversation with someone that is our political opposite. And I think step one, remain calm. Step two, know that you can maintain your beliefs and your passions. You're not going to lose them just by hearing someone else's point of view. But ask questions. That's what Socrates did. There's a wonderful story about Socrates ran into I don't know what he was at the time. He was getting ready to go argue in front of the court against his own father, taking his father to court. And so Socrates stopped him and started asking him all these questions. And he asked him another question, and another question, and another question, and another question, and another question. Turns out he really didn't even really know why he was suing his father on this principle. He just knew that it was a principle, and so he had to sue him, but he really didn't understand why. So, when we're with a political opposite, we can just ask questions. And ask more questions. And ask more questions. Yeah, that's how we have a political discussion. Just ask questions. Okay, and I'm going to wrap with this because I think it's really, really interesting. This is a quote of Samuel Stumpf's interpretation of Plato. So, remember we were talking about the cave, right? Okay, so here we go. Besides awakening one or breaking off his chains, the effective teacher must turn the prisoner around so that he will shift his gaze from the shadows that's in the cave to the real world. And as we already noticed, the liberated prisoner will move from the shadows to actual objects, to mathematical objects, and finally to a knowledge of the good, capital G. See, good, God, we've taken that out of our society, which is kind of a problem. Along this arduous trek, he passes through the realm of opinion, where imagining and belief are the modes of knowing, until he crosses over the divide into the intelligible world, where thinking and true knowing are achieved. As the mind moves progressively from the lower to the higher levels of knowledge, it recalls more of what it once knew. We talked about that yesterday. And what it must know to achieve inner harmony. One's moral development parallels his intellectual ascent, for one's growing knowledge intensifies his love for truth, capital T, beauty, capital B, and goodness, capital G. And so, I really love this definition too of morality, of moral, because it really equates it to to the morality of just knowledge, of really understanding. And this is the sort of dividing, I think they call it the dividing graph of Plato, between the dividing line. But imagining and belief aren't really rooted in true knowledge. But the more and more we ask and the more and more we learn, the more true knowledge we have. And then we have more harmony as human beings, and certainly as a society. And I think that's what George Washington and our founders meant when they said, if we don't have a general knowledge and a general morality, we cannot be a sustaining republic, because we won't be able to find any harmony. And the harmony comes from knowledge, and that knowledge is virtue. And that's what Plato believed. So, and I love that part about, as we search for these things, we become closer and closer to what we already knew. And that's when we were with God before our soul entered the body. Yeah, lots to think about there, right? Lots of philosophy. Have some front porch philosophy in your household, okay? And I hope you have a wonderful weekend. And thank you so much for joining me this week, our second week in Front Porch Philosophy.